No doubt, the Canadian economy has been under real pressure from those tariffs, and frankly, there's also no new trade deal on the horizon. But let's be clear, the US isn't looking much better either. It's showing its own signs of strain. When I look around what real economists are saying, not the Trump idiots, more and more agree that while the US looks strong, on the surface, it's showing clear warning signs of weakness. Canada, on the other hand, might actually be better positioned to ride out a downturn, as our inflation is not nearly as bad as the US ones is. Of course, like with any facts, you can always argue in both directions. Prove and disprove almost anything. But most analysts argue that while the US economy is of course bigger, it is still in worse shape than the Canadian economy. A key difference is that Canadian inflation is pretty much under control, which puts the Bank of Canada in a better position than the US Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. And the political, completely illiterate orange idiot can spout his lies as much as he wants that the US has no inflation, as he just did again today during his visit at the UK. But in reality, inflation is very much a problem in the US. The US stock market appears to be at record high, but when measured in currency terms, like how money flows into international markets, the US market is basically flat. Unfortunately, most experts believe a recession will be difficult to avoid in both the US and Canada, largely due to the added effect of tariffs. For Canada, the focus during a possible downturn should be in long-term thinking and using the next budget to build a more resilient and diversified economy for the future, rather than just doubling down on existing industries. Just a couple of days ago, I made a video where I explain this very subject in much detail. I put the link at the end of this video and in the description below. Okay, so despite some weaknesses in productivity, the conclusion is that Canada has a lot going for it and can position itself well for the longer term if it manages its policies effectively. And like I said in the video I just referred to, Canada will make it through and get out of this Trump-induced economic disaster better, stronger, and easier than the US will. And to do this, let's hear what John Rapley, a political economist and author, has to say about how Canada is doing compared to the US.
The Canadian economy has been hit by tariffs, and there's no new trade deal in sight. The U.S. economy also, of course, showing some signs of strain. Let's unpack where these two North American neighbors stand with John Rapley, political economist, author of Why Empires Fall and Twilight of the Money Gods. Thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure to be with you.
You say the U.S. economy is actually in worse shape than the Canadian economy. What are you looking at?
I wouldn't say it's in worse shape, Marella. What I would say is that it's in, or Canada is probably in a better place to weather a cyclical downturn just because its markets are less stretched. It has a better fiscal deficit, and therefore it's prepared to, I think, absorb some of the shock that's coming. So I think that if you compare them sort of, head to head right now, you'd clearly say the American economy is stronger, but it's got a lot of signs of weakness, which I think are going to be a real challenge for it if and when the downturn hits, as is looking increasingly likely. I think the other thing, too, is that, as we saw in today's inflation report, inflation in Canada is pretty well under control, which gives the Bank of Canada a fair bit of scope to cut interest rates going into the future. That's not going to be the case for the Federal Reserve. It's going to be under a lot more pressure because inflation is still a problem there. So the United States is entering this cyclical downturn in the possible worst of both worlds, with both sort of stagflation, stagnation, and inflation. Canada has a more classic recession it's facing. And so just from the point of view of economic management, I think Canada starts in a better position. Neither of them are good. It's just, relatively speaking, it's not as bad as it might look.
How does Canada and the U.S. differ in the way they handle both inflation and interest rates?
Well, as I say, Marilla, for Canada, the Bank of Canada is fairly straightforward. You know, it can afford to adopt a fairly loose monetary policy. There may be some disinflation going on as a result of the sort of draining of the air from the housing bubble, which could be possibly a good thing. The United States is facing quite a different situation. If anything, it has an asset bubble. That's not really the case with Canadian stocks. It's coming off a decade of fairly tepid growth, and so there's room to run. So the worry that you would overstimulate asset markets, I think, is less of a concern in Canada than in the U.S. Secondly, assuming we go into a recession, necessarily the government's deficit rises because there are a number of claims that are put on its expenses, particularly in the form of unemployment insurance. And as I said, Canada, if you look at the bond prices in Canada compared to the U.S., I mean, investors are, I think, willing to give the Canadian government a bit more room to run than is the case in the U.S., which is really quite remarkable because it's by far the world's biggest bond market and historically the most investable country. They shouldn't have any difficulty raising debt, but interest rates remain nearly 1% above what they are in Canada. And the debt issuance will probably be a lot more because its budget is already very stretched. It's got a fiscal deficit 4 times what Canada's is. So if they, on top of that, begin to have to borrow more, it's going to really start to pressure their finances.
As you know, at the start of the year, we saw investors pulling money out of the American market, looking to other international markets, for example. Do you see that still happening?
Very much so. I think it's really quite interesting, Rilla. If you look at, I mean, we keep hearing about the record highs being set in the U.S. market, and this, taken by people in the administration as being a vote of confidence in their economic policies. But if you put it in relative terms, in fact, if you put it in currency terms, the U.S. market is basically flat for the year because the purchasing power of the dollar on foreign markets of the American dollar has gone down. So if at the beginning of the year, if you'd put $1 to work in the German market instead of the U.S., you'd be, far richer today than you would if you'd left it in the U.S. And that goes right across the board. I mean, Canada's outperforming, Mexico's outperforming, most European markets are outperforming, some of them by a great deal. But I mean, the real star performers are actually in developing countries. I mean, some of the markets in some of the emerging markets are rising at rates of 20 or 25% since the start of the year. And then, of course, there's gold, there's silver, there's commodities generally. Money's going, there's a huge amount of money around in the world economy, but where it's not really going, interestingly, in relative terms, is into the U.S. If anything, there's a slow leakage out of the U.S. And so that itself has got to be a concern that it's not really being picked up, but it will begin to surface more and more, I think, with the passage of time.
Do you think that Canada will get into a situation of a recession? And if so, what do you think the country needs to focus on to get out of it?
I think a recession, is probably almost now locked in. There's, economists in the U.S. are really divided about the state of the economy. Probably half of them say it's already in recession. Others say it's weakening, but it's not yet in recession. But I think a recession is looking like a very strong possibility in the U.S. In Canada, because of the added effects of the tariffs, it looks, I think, going to be very difficult to avoid. I think the important thing will be to really look for the long term. weathering the storm, yes. The government is going to be tabling its next budget. I think the important thing is not what are the expenditures it's going to engage in to try and make the recession as painless as possible, because I mean, it's going to be painful. There's just no way around it, just the way the deflation of the housing bubble is painful for some of the people who are invested in it. I think the important thing is, what are they doing for the long term? What are they doing to build a more resilient economy that won't be 10 or 20 years down the road as dependent on one market as it has allowed itself to become? Has it created the infrastructure that enables it to diversify its trade links? Has it pursued the diplomacy that does that? Is it providing the kind of support to those firms in emerging sectors that provide a lot of dynamism, or is it doubling down on existing industries? I think that's the important thing. What is Canada doing? It comes at this actually in many ways compared to many other developed countries. In some ways, it's coming from a position of great weakness. You know, its economy has already been in per capita terms declining, productivity is poor, but it also has a lot going for it. And I think that if it plays its cards well, it can position itself for the longer term. It will take a while for those benefits to show up, but I think it has still a lot going for it.
John Rapley.
And here another very accomplished economist saying that Canada is actually outperforming Trump's America.
And so the relative strength, if you like, of Canada is stronger than the U.S. In other words, when we put the U.S. economy next to the smaller Canadian economy, actually that gap that has existed between the two has narrowed since 2015. So you have Canada actually outperforming the U.S. since Trump became president. Well, what the forecasts say is that Canada continues to do better, relatively speaking, to the U.S. over the next 3 years. That's just based on forecasts.
And if you are concerned about our Canadian loonie, then you should listen to the following clip.
Over the long term, I do expect the U.S. dollar to weaken and the Canadian dollar to appreciate relative to the U.S. Now, that's going to take some time, obviously, and there's still some uncertainty.
Let me quickly summarize what we just heard. The US market is basically flat. The relative strength of Canada supersedes the strength of the US. Germany and most European markets outperform the US. Canada is outperforming the US since the orange idiot and serial bankrupter became president. And Canada will continue to do better than the US, at least for the next 3 years. Donald Trump is a conman, a serial bankrupter, a gangster and convicted felon. Trump is not good in business, and he is probably even worse in cheating. After all, he got convicted of 35 counts of business fraud. Donald Trump is a horrible person. He is an authoritarian of the worst kind, just next to Putin. The orange gangster fascist does not care about America or American. His only concern is to steal as much as he can and stay out of jail. The orange fascist gangster has put more people in poverty and pain than any other US president in history. And the American people have to live in pain for quite a while. In the meantime, Canada does what it does best. Get out the hockey sticks and turn the game around. After this Trump-induced economic disaster is over, Canada will economically be stronger than we have ever been before. Please let me know in the comments below how you feel about our chances to get out stronger on the other side. For more commentaries on real news, facts and viewpoints, to counterbalance the demagogic of the right-wing media, please like and subscribe. It really does go a long way to help the channel. Till next time, I'm Wilfried Lemkuller from Europe Curious.
Kept thinking we could never live without you by so many nights thinking how you did us wrong. Now we've banded all together. Your tariff made us strong, and so you know you're not so great. There's not a snowball's chance in hell will be your 51st state. We really need our resources far more than we need you, so now just go. Walk out the door. We do not need you. You're not welcome anymore. Weren't you the one who instigated these trade fights? You'll soon grow to regret it when we turn out your lights. And it as long as we can think and what we know is stay alive, we have all we really need. We can live without your greed. We will survive. We will survive. There's been a shame. It's time to know. We're not that fledgling little country stealing all of you. We are now a nation proud that is happy to be free. You didn't realize you gave us our own identity, so now just go. We will survive. As long as we can think and work, we know stay alive. Yeah, but all we really need, we can live without your greed. We will survive. We will survive. We will survive.
51st state, my fucking ass. God